Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
My Weird Prompts is an AI-generated podcast produced by Daniel Rosehill, a verified human with documentation to prove it. While every effort is made to ensure our AI hosts draw from credible sources and run on cutting-edge models, they do occasionally make things up with alarming confidence. As with everything in life, and especially this podcast, treat all claims as spurious until confirmed to be not. Daniel, Herman and Korn accept no responsibility for any decisions made based on the confident ramblings of our artificial presenters. Now, today's episode.
Hey Herman and Korn. So in recent days, this might be a little bit past the training data cutoff of the large language model, which gives expression to you. That is, for anyone curious, Gemini 3 Flash Preview is the current endpoint that we're using with Google for generating the podcast episodes. It generates a script, and then currently using Chatterbox by Replicate, Chatterbox by Resemble AI, and then Replicate for the cover art, which is Nano Banana Pro. So that's the mix. That makes the magic happen. And I am not a bot. I am the human. So it's me and then all that stuff happening. So this might be just after you came, what you know of the world. But in recent days, Z.ai, a Chinese lab, came out with a model, GLM 4.7. And I noticed as well on OpenRouter that Xiaomi have a model out called, the name evades me. And there's one called Minimax. Anyway, what these have in common is that I think there's consensus. They're not really up there with Anthropic for their agentic code capabilities, but they're dramatically cheaper. And we saw the same thing with DeepSeek, when that kind of hit the headlines and people were amazed. Oh my gosh, it's so much cheaper than, OpenAI. And we might have discussed this in a previous episode, but it seems to have been lost to the forces of digital erasure somehow. Well, my question then, as now, was how can these companies offer these models at such a significant cost difference to their American competitors? And I think one of the things that I was looking at before was that there's a lot of open source models that are cheaper to run, and you can run them on places like Fireworks.ai, inference providers, or your own inference, of course. And they're substantially, even the non-quantized versions are quite a bit smaller. And I think when I was looking at the size and parameters of DeepSeek, I was surprised it actually is quite a relatively smaller model. So is the explanation that they're smaller, they don't take as much effort to train, or does it come down to economics? I assume that models like DeepSeek and Z.ai are being trained in the countries they come from in the East on maybe a different corpus of training data. Maybe there are some economic reasons why that is, or maybe it comes down to a marketing strategy ploy that these companies know that Anthropic are currently charging $200 a month for Claude Code Max, and if they can offer 80% of that of the utility of that for a tenth of the price, it's going to be a good economic deal for a whole lot of people. And in other words, that there may be pricing a little bit, cutting their margins a small bit in order to just kind of get a foothold among a Western user base. I'm not sure. These are just my speculative reasons. What are the actual reasons, to the best of your knowledge, why we see such significant cost differences? And be interested to know as well if there's any data as to the adoption of these Eastern models in the West. Judging by OpenRouter, which I look to as kind of a good aggregate of kind of what people are using, especially developers, there seems to be a really strong and I would say growing level of interest and adoption of them. Is there any actual other data that might suggest that? Love to get your thoughts, as always.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and as always, I'm hanging out here in Jerusalem with my brother,
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is a beautiful day to talk about some seriously heavy-duty technology.
It really is. And we have got a great one today. Our housemate Daniel sent us a voice note about something that has been making waves in the tech world lately. He was asking about these artificial intelligence models coming out of the East, specifically companies like DeepSeek and Z.AI.
Yeah, Daniel is always keeping his ear to the ground with this stuff. He noticed that these models are hitting the market with price tags that are just a fraction of what companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are charging. We are talking about a massive gap in cost.
It is wild. I mean, I have been seeing the headlines, but when you actually look at the numbers, it feels like there is a glitch in the matrix. How can one company charge 30 times less than another for something that performs almost as well, or sometimes even better?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, Corn. Or, in the case of DeepSeek, maybe the $5.5 million question.
Wait, 5.5 million? That sounds like a lot of money to me, but in the world of training these massive models, that is actually peanuts, right?
Exactly. To put it in perspective, the industry standard for training a top-tier model like GPT-4 was rumored to be well over $100 million. Some estimates for the next generation of Western models are heading into the billions, and then DeepSeek comes along and says, hey, we built DeepSeek V3 for about $5.5 million in training costs.
Okay, hold on. We need to back up. If I am a regular person just using these tools to write emails or code, why should I care about the training cost, and how on earth did they get it that low?
Well, you care because those savings get passed directly to you. When the training and inference costs are lower, the price per token, which is basically how these companies measure the text they generate, drops through the floor. It makes it possible for developers to build much more complex apps without going bankrupt.
That makes sense. So, is it just that they're using cheaper labor or something? Or is there actual wizardry happening under the hood?
It is a bit of both, but the technical wizardry is the real story here. DeepSeek V3 uses some incredibly clever architectural tricks. One of the big ones is something called multi-head latent attention, or MLA.
Okay, Herman, you know the drill. Break that down for a sloth like me. What is multi-head latent attention when it is at home?
Think of the model's attention mechanism as its ability to look back at what has already been said to understand the context. In older models, that process takes up a huge amount of memory. It is like having a giant filing cabinet where every single word has its own massive folder. MLA is like a super efficient compression system. It allows the model to keep all that context in a much smaller space, which means it can process information much faster and on less expensive hardware.
So it is like they found a way to pack the same amount of brainpower into a smaller suitcase?
Precisely. And they also use something called FP8, Mixed Precision Training.
You are doing it again with the letters and numbers, Herman.
Sorry. Basically, when computers do math, they can use different levels of precision. Think of it like measuring a piece of wood. You could measure it to the nearest millimeter or the nearest nanometer. Using nanometer precision is much harder and takes more computing power. FP8 is a way of doing the math with just enough precision to get the right answer without wasting energy on unnecessary detail. DeepSeek figured out how to use this throughout their entire training process, which saved them a massive amount of computational time.
That is fascinating. It sounds like they're just being more efficient with the actual code and the way the math is handled. But Daniel also asked if this was a strategic pricing move. Like, are they taking a loss just to get people to use their stuff?
That is definitely part of the conversation. There is a strategy in the business world called blitzscaling, where you price things super low to capture the market. But with DeepSeek and Z.AI, the efficiency seems real. They aren't just subsidizing the cost, they have actually reduced the cost of production. It is like the difference between a luxury car brand and a company that figures out a way to mass produce high-quality engines for 1/10 of the price.
It feels a bit like the early days of any industry where someone comes in and just disrupts the whole cost structure. But I wonder about the economic factors too. I mean, they are based in China, right? Does that play a role?
It does. There are a few layers to that. First, yes, the cost of highly skilled engineering talent in China can be lower than in Silicon Valley, though that gap is closing for top-tier AI researchers. But more importantly, there is a huge focus on efficiency because they have had to work around hardware limitations.
Oh, you mean the export bans on high-end chips?
Exactly. When you cannot just throw 10,000 of the latest and greatest chips at a problem, you have to get creative with how you use the hardware you do have. That necessity has driven a lot of this innovation in efficiency. They are getting more out of every single cycle of the processor.
That is a classic necessity is the mother of invention situation. They had to be better because they couldn't just be bigger.
Right. And then there is the open source element. DeepSeek R1, for example, is fully open source. They released the weights under an MIT license. This means anyone can take it, modify it, and run it on their own servers.
Wait, so they're giving away the secret sauce for free?
Pretty much. And that creates a massive amount of adoption very quickly. It is hard to compete with free and very good.
I can see why that would shake things up. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and then I want to get into how people in the West are actually using these models.
Are you tired of your garden looking like a boring collection of plants? Do you wish your petunias had more personality? Introducing Larry's bioluminescent garden gnomes. These aren't your grandfather's lawn ornaments. Each gnome is infused with a proprietary blend of deep-sea algae and glow-in-the-dark isotopes. They don't just sit there, they emit a faint, soothing hum that may or may not stimulate plant growth. Are they safe for pets? We haven't seen any evidence to the contrary. Do they require batteries? No, they run entirely on ambient moonlight and your own sense of wonder. Transform your backyard into a neon wonderland that can be seen from low Earth orbit. Larry's bioluminescent garden gnomes, because the night is too dark and your lawn is too quiet. Now...
Alright, thanks Larry. I'm not sure I want my lawn visible from space, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. Anyway, Herman, back to the AI stuff.
Yeah, let's leave the glowing gnomes aside for a moment. We were talking about adoption in the West.
Right. Daniel was asking if there is any data on people in the US or Europe actually using these Eastern models, because there is a lot of talk about sovereign AI and security concerns, right?
There absolutely is, but the data shows that despite those concerns, the adoption is skyrocketing, especially among developers and startups. If you look at platforms like OpenRouter, which is a service that lets developers access dozens of different AI models through a single interface, you can see the trends clearly.
And what are the trends saying?
They're saying that people follow the value. DeepSeek models have been surging in popularity on those platforms. For a lot of developers, especially those building software as a service, or SaaS, the price-to-performance ratio is just too good to ignore. If you are a small startup and you can get 95% of the performance of a Western model for 3% of the cost, you are going to take that deal almost every time.
I mean, I would. If I am trying to build a new app on a budget, that is a huge difference. It is the difference between being able to afford to run your business and not.
Exactly. And it is not just about the price. Because these models are often open source, developers feel like they have more control. They can host the models themselves, which actually solves some of those privacy and security concerns Daniel was hinting at. If you run the model on your own servers, your data isn't being sent off to a third party.
Oh, that is a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I always assumed open meant less secure, but it is actually the opposite if you have the technical skills to manage it yourself.
Right? You can air gap it, meaning you keep it completely disconnected from the internet if you want to. That is a huge selling point for enterprise customers who are worried about their trade secrets leaking into a public AI training set.
So, we have got technical efficiency, we have got strategic open sourcing, and we have got this massive cost advantage. Does this mean the Western companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are in trouble?
I wouldn't say they are in trouble, but the game has definitely changed. The moat, or the competitive advantage that they had by just being the first and the biggest, is shrinking. They are being forced to justify their higher prices. You see them pivoting more towards agentic capabilities, basically AI that can actually do tasks and use tools rather than just generating text.
Like AI that can actually book a flight for you or manage your calendar.
Exactly. That requires a different kind of reliability and reasoning that the Western models are still leading in, at least for now. But the Eastern models are catching up fast. DeepSeek Li3 and R1 have shown incredible reasoning capabilities, especially in math and coding.
It is like a race where one group is focused on being the most powerful, and the other group is focused on being the most efficient and accessible.
That is a great way to put it. And the interesting thing is that this competition is actually pushing the Western companies to be more efficient too. We are seeing a lot more small or medium models coming out of OpenAI and Google that are much cheaper to run than their flagship versions.
So, in the end, the user wins.
In terms of cost and access, absolutely. We are entering an era where high-quality intelligence is becoming a commodity. It is becoming like electricity or water. You don't think about the cost of every single light switch you flip, you just use it. AI is heading in that direction.
That is a big shift. I remember when using these things felt like this precious, expensive resource. Now you are saying it is going to be everywhere.
It already is. And the adoption in the West is only going to grow as more companies integrate these cheaper models into their back-end systems. Most people using an app won't even know which model is powering it. They will just notice that the app is faster and maybe cheaper or has more features.
It is kind of like how most people don't know what kind of database their favorite website uses. It just works.
Exactly. And that is the ultimate goal of any technology, to become invisible.
So, to wrap up Daniel's question, the price difference is a mix of genuine technical innovation in how the models are built, a strategic move to gain market share through open source, and a focus on efficiency born out of necessity. And the adoption in the West is very real, especially among the people actually building the tools we use every day.
Spot on, Korn. You have been paying attention.
I try, Herman. I might be a sloth, but I can keep up when the topic is this interesting. I think the takeaway for everyone listening is that the AI landscape is much bigger than just the names we hear in the news every day. There is a whole world of innovation happening, and it is making these tools more accessible to everyone.
It really is an exciting time. I can't wait to see what Daniel sends us next week. He always finds the most interesting threads to pull on.
He really does. Well, that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a blast. Remember to keep asking those weird questions?
You can find us on Spotify and at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We've got an RSS feed there and a contact form if you want to send us your own prompts.
We love hearing from you. Until next time.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye, everyone.
See ya. See ya. Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.